Here is a question worth asking before we get into the rest of this video. Why does a single tropical fruit tree produce enough food to feed an adult human for an entire year with essentially no replanting, no plowing, no fertilizer, no herbicide, and no annual labor input? While the dominant American grain crop requires millions of acres, billions of dollars of agricultural infrastructure, and complete replanting every 12 months, the answer involves a slave economy, a British naval mutiny, and one of the most ambitious botanical relocation projects in the history of European colonialism. If you are new here, subscribe. The plant is breadfruit, a large tropical tree native to New Guinea and spread by ancient Pacific Islander voyagers across the islands of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia over the past 3,000 years. The fruit grows on the tree in clusters, round to oval, roughly the size of a small football. Green, skinned when immature and yellow-brown when fully ripe. A single mature tree produces, on average, between 150 and 300 fruits per year, distributed across multiple seasonal waves rather than a single annual harvest. Research at the National Tropical Botanical Gardens Breadfruit Institute in Hawaii documented an average of 269 fruits per tree per year across multiple cultivars, with average fruit weight of 1.2 kilograms. This translates to roughly 700 pounds of food per tree per year under reasonable cultivation conditions. Across a typical planting density of 50 trees per hectare, this produces roughly 5.2 metric tons per hectare per year of edible food from a single planting that continues producing for decades. Breadfruit trees commonly remain productive for 50 to 80 years. Some documented trees in the Pacific have been producing fruit continuously for over a century from a single planting. Now to the comparison the title of this video promises. This is the part most people get wrong, and I want to be honest about exactly what is and is not true. If you measure raw calories produced per acre per year, industrial American corn outperforms breadfruit. Corn in modern industrial production yields roughly 15 million calories per acre per year. Breadfruit yields roughly 8 million calories per acre per year. By that single metric, the title of this video would be misleading. But that is not the only metric that matters. Corn requires plowing, seeding, fertilizing with synthetic nitrogen, pesticide application, herbicide application, mechanical cultivation, combined harvesting, drying, storage, and complete replanting every single year. Each acre of corn requires roughly 70 gallons of fossil fuel, 200 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer, and continuous labor input across the growing season. A breadfruit tree, once established, requires essentially nothing. No plowing, no annual replanting, no fertilizer, in moderately fertile tropical soil, very little supplemental water, no herbicide, no pesticide, a few hours of light pruning per year. For the labor and input cost of 1 acre of corn for 10 years, roughly $150,000 in modern agriculture economics, you can establish a breadfruit grove that produces continuously for 50 years on labor and material costs, measured in hundreds of dollars rather than thousands. The single tree also produces multiple foods from one plant. The unripe green fruit is cooked as a starchy vegetable similar to potato or plantain in texture. The ripe fruit can be eaten raw as a sweet dessert or cooked into custards, puddings, and traditional desserts. The seeds of seeded varieties are roasted and eaten like chestnuts. The young leaves are cooked as a vegetable in some Pacific Islander cuisines. The tree's milky white latex sap has been used historically for caulking canoes and waterproofing. The wood is highly valued for construction and was traditionally used for outrigger canoes across the Pacific. The bark fiber is processed into traditional Pacific Islander tapa cloth. When you compare a breadfruit tree to a cornfield on the metric the title actually implies, total usable food and material output per unit of input over the lifetime of the planting, breadfruit produces dramatically more. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. The reason most Americans have never eaten breadfruit has nothing to do with the plant's productivity. It has everything to do with what happened between 1787 and 1793. The story begins with sugar. By the late 1780s, the British Empire had built one of the most lucrative industries in human history around sugar production in the Caribbean. Sugar plantations in Jamaica, Barbados, St. Vincent, and other British colonies generated enormous wealth for British investors. The plantations operated almost entirely on enslaved African labor. By 1787, roughly 600,000 enslaved Africans were working British Caribbean sugar plantations under conditions that killed workers at extraordinary rates. The plantations faced a specific economic problem. Enslaved laborers needed to eat. Food had to be either grown locally or imported from European sources. Local food production reduced the acreage available for sugar. Imported food increased operational costs. The plantation owners, working through the Royal Society of London and its president Sir Joseph Banks, identified a potential solution. The Pacific Islands contained a fruit tree that produced abundant food with minimal labor input. If breadfruit trees could be transported from Tahiti to the Caribbean, they could provide cheap calories for enslaved laborers without consuming valuable plantation land or requiring expensive food imports. The British government, under King George III, approved the project in 1787. The Royal Navy assigned a ship, HMS Bounty, to make the voyage. The naval officer chosen to command the expedition was Lieutenant William Bligh, a 40-year-old officer with previous Pacific experience under Captain James Cook. Bligh and the Bounty departed England in December of 1787. They reached Tahiti on October 26, 1788, and spent 5 months gathering breadfruit cuttings, rooting them in pots, and preparing them for the voyage to the Caribbean. By April of 1789, the Bounty was carrying 1,015 potted breadfruit saplings. The voyage to the Caribbean was expected to take roughly 6 months. The breadfruit project, from the British government's perspective, was on track. What happened next has been the subject of 3 major Hollywood films and several historical novels. On April 28, 1789, 23 days out of Tahiti, the master's mate Fletcher Christian led a mutiny against Captain Bligh. The mutineers seized control of the ship, threw the breadfruit saplings overboard, and set Bligh and 18 loyal crew members adrift in a 23-foot open boat with limited supplies. The Bounty sailed back toward Tahiti. Bligh, with extraordinary seamanship, navigated the open boat 3,118 nautical miles to the Dutch settlement of Timor in approximately 7 weeks. He returned to England as a hero. What is unusual is what he did next. Within 2 years of returning from the Bounty disaster, Bligh was reassigned to a new ship, HMS Providence, and dispatched on a second breadfruit voyage in 1791. This time the mission succeeded. Bligh collected 2,126 breadfruit seedlings in Tahiti. Of these, 678 survived the long voyage to the Caribbean. On January 23, 1793, HMS Providence arrived at St. Vincent. The surviving breadfruit saplings were planted at the St. Vincent Botanical Gardens in Kingstown. Additional saplings were sent to the Bath Botanical Gardens in Jamaica. From these original 1793 plantings, breadfruit spread across the Caribbean, into Central and South America, and eventually to over 90 countries where the tree grows today. The original economic purpose was straightforward: cheap food for enslaved sugar plantation workers. The botanical project worked exactly as planned. By the early 1800s, breadfruit was established as a regular component of Caribbean enslaved laborer diets, providing the cheap calories the plantation economy required. What is unusual is the cultural reception. The enslaved African workers initially rejected breadfruit as a food. The plantation owners eventually forced the issue, and over several decades, breadfruit became integrated into Caribbean cuisine in ways that persisted long after slavery was abolished. Today, breadfruit is a beloved staple food across Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and most of the Caribbean. Roast breadfruit is a Sunday dinner tradition in many Jamaican households. Caribbean breadfruit dishes are now considered distinctive cultural cuisine across the region. The British colonial project to feed enslaved laborers became a permanent cultural inheritance that the descendants of those laborers have made entirely their own. But the plant remained almost completely absent from mainstream American food culture through the entire 19th and 20th centuries. The reason involves climate, transportation, and one specific American cultural blind spot. Part 4. Breadfruit cannot survive frost. The tree tolerates cool temperatures but is killed by sustained exposure to temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. This restricts cultivation in the continental United States to USDA hardiness zones 10B and 11, roughly the southern tip of Florida, the warmest parts of coastal southern California, Hawaii, and a few protected microclimates in southern Texas. For 98% of the American agricultural landmass, breadfruit cultivation is simply not possible. The fruit also does not transport well in fresh form. Ripe breadfruit has a shelf life of 3 to 5 days under standard refrigeration. This eliminates the long-distance commercial supply chain that brought tropical fruits like bananas and pineapples to mainstream American grocery stores in the early 20th century. A banana could be picked green, shipped under refrigeration, and ripened in destination warehouses. A breadfruit picked green and shipped to Cleveland would arrive overripe and unappetizing. The American food industry adapted around these constraints by establishing supply chains for tropical fruits that could be shipped efficiently: bananas, pineapples, later mangoes, and papayas, while leaving breadfruit out of the equation entirely. By the 1950s, when American food culture was being shaped by post-war consumer abundance, breadfruit was effectively invisible to mainstream American consumers. The plant existed in Hawaii, in Caribbean immigrant communities, in the kitchens of Filipino and Pacific Islander households, but had no presence in the supermarket model that defined American eating. This is changing slowly. The National Tropical Botanical Garden in Hawaii established its Breadfruit Institute in 2002, under the leadership of plant scientist Diane Ragone. The institute maintains the world's largest living collection of breadfruit varieties. over 270 accession trees representing more than 150 cultivars from across the Pacific Islands and other tropical regions. The Institute's stated mission is to promote breadfruit cultivation as a response to global food insecurity in tropical regions. The mission has gained significant traction. Breadfruit cultivation programs are now active in over 50 tropical countries. The Hawaiian Ulu Cooperative, a native Hawaiian agricultural organization, processes breadfruit into frozen and prepared products that have begun appearing in specialty grocery stores across the continental United States. A small but growing breadfruit flour industry has developed in Hawaii, Florida, and parts of the Caribbean, producing gluten-free flour that is being marketed to consumers with celiac disease and to traditional baking applications. The 2011 study by Jones, Ragone, and colleagues at the National Tropical Botanical Garden, published in the Journal of Food Composition and Analysis, documented protein and mineral content across 94 breadfruit cultivars. The findings were significant. Many cultivars contained higher calcium, iron, potassium, and magnesium than refined wheat, rice, and corn flours. The protein quality is complete, all 9 essential amino acids in usable proportions, which is rare among starchy staple crops. The fruit is naturally gluten-free, which makes it potentially valuable in the rapidly growing gluten-free flour market. What you have in a single breadfruit tree is a food crop that produces complete protein, generates substantial quantities of usable food across multiple decades, requires almost no annual labor input, and tolerates a wide range of tropical soil conditions. The plant cannot grow in most of America, but for the small portion of America where it can grow, and for the global tropical regions that contain roughly half of the world's food insecure population, breadfruit may be one of the most important food crops that mainstream American agriculture has ever overlooked. If you live in Hawaii, southern Florida, or coastal Southern California, a single breadfruit tree planted in your yard will produce more food than any other crop in your climate and continue doing so for 50 years. For everyone else, breadfruit flour is now available from Hawaiian Ulu Cooperative and a handful of specialty food retailers, producing complete protein, gluten-free baked goods from a plant that fed Pacific civilizations for 3,000 years. Subscribe so you do not miss the next plant that the standard story of American agriculture quietly left out.